Swadeshi means everything. But there was no sign of any freedom, and a few years later, he begins, because everything was stagnating, there was no sign of the British giving independence at all, and he needed something to trigger the minds of the people, to trigger the world opinion against the British, and he got this when they imposed a tax on salt. This is such a small thing. They were laughing at him, when he said that he's going to fight against the salt tax. He wrote a letter to the Viceroy. It was Lord Irwin. And he told the Viceroy, I am going to march from Sabarmati and go all the way to Dandi, and I am going to make salt. And they thought, okay, let him go, let him make salt. What's going to happen? Nothing is going to happen. But he began from Sabarmati. There were 79 Satyagrahis from his ashram with him, and they began to walk. They walked and walked for 24 days. They would stop in the afternoon somewhere, stop at night somewhere, and just walk. And sometimes he would run, sometimes he would lead, he would talk to them, talk to everyone. And at every village that he halted, more and more people would join him. Until finally, by the time it reached Dandi, it was like this. There were crowds of volunteers. We don't know how many in all. All of them at Dandi to make salt. He talks to the crowd, he tells them what they should do. They're very disciplined. They say you should never lift your hand, be careful, march in neat rows, go to the seashore, pick up the salt. They will hit you, do not hit them back, do not touch them. He organized a first aid group of women who would take care of those who were injured and so on. And many of them were dragged off, taken away to jail. They were all beaten. There were no guns this time because they learned their lesson at Jallianwala Bagh. So this time what they used were lathis or batons, just about 5 feet long sticks. They would hit them, and the women would take them up, bandage them. They would come back to the front line again make salt, keep hitting them until finally they were all dragged away to jail. 60,000 people were arrested. They just kept them for a few hours and they had to let them go because there was no place in the jails. So this is the first time that women participated in this as well. So now this gave a lot of publicity to India's demand for freedom worldwide, and then Britain was finally forced to take action, and they called a round table conference in London. This was the second round table conference. The earlier one, Gandhi was not invited. This one in 1931, Gandhi went there, but he did not like it. He said the whole thing is a huge camouflage. They are trying to divide the people. They're talking about Hindus, about Muslims, about the untouchables, about the backward castes. They're creating problems rather than just leave us to govern ourselves and so on and so forth. He came back very disappointed. But it was during his time in London that we come across this episode that I've taken the title of my talk from, when Churchill spoke about Gandhi. Churchill never met Gandhi. He refused to meet him. While Gandhi was there, he said, it is alarming and also nauseating to see Mr. Gandhi, a seditious Middle Temple lawyer, now posing as a fakir of a type well known in the East, striding half naked up the steps of the Viceregal Palace, while he's still organizing and conducting a defiant campaign of civil disobedience to parley on equal terms with a representative of the King Emperor. So Churchill did not believe in giving India independence, and he was very angry with Gandhi. But Gandhi did not mind it at all, because he just met whom he wanted to meet, and he felt that it was a compliment, a fakir, because a fakir is a holy man, somebody, an ascetic, who gives up all material wants and needs in life. And that too naked, he said it's the most difficult task, to be naked and a fakir. He went and met the king, and this is how he was dressed when he went to meet the king. And then later some journalists asked him, how did you feel meeting the king? You are not dressed and the king is so royally and legally dressed. So he said the king had enough on for both of us. So that's that. Then he also met Charlie Chaplin. Gandhi did not know who Charlie Chaplin was, and then they had to explain to him, who is this person. And they had a lot in common with each other, because both of them were talking about the common man and what happens to him and poverty and what goes on and so on. He also went and met the mill workers in Britain. Because at this time, India was completely not buying British cloth. So the mill workers were in trouble. The mills were closing down, there was unemployment, but Gandhi went and met them, he talked to them, he explained to them the reasons why India is doing what they are doing. And throughout he was spinning, he came back, continued spinning. He was reading, talking, traveling. A man is a sum of his actions, of what he has done, of what he can do, nothing else. Every now and then he would get arrested, but he didn't mind that. He said it is his rest, because he was so tired, of all his work. But even in jail he would spin, he would make slippers, he would give it to his jailers and wardens and so on. And then comes the Second World War. And again Britain comes to India and says, we need help, please, can you be with us while we fight the Second World War? And yes, India did. India did it with goodwill. And very often people assume that, Indian soldiers, maybe just soldiers, foot soldiers, cannon fodder. No, they were very good, educated people who risked their lives for the world. Here you have squadron leader Karun Krishna Majumdar, Begum Pasha Shah, Indian Air Force engineering officers, Indian RAF ground crew, Indian technicians assembling Hurricanes, mechanical engineers at work in the Royal Indian Navy, and a week before German surrender in Italy, Indian Railway Maintenance Company repairing the railways in Italy, in Bologna. Workers at Indian Railway Workshop now employed the construction of armoured vehicles. Indian Sherman tank of the 9th Royal Deccan Horse in Burma. Indian troops moving ammunition in Burma. And here in Singapore, Indian troops in Singapore. And then soon after the Second World War ended, yes, India put forth its demand for independence once again. This time, yes, India was taken more seriously and things began to move in that direction, but there were problems, there were divisions among the people, there were demands for the partition of the country. Gandhi had tried to keep away from politics. He was more interested in social reform at this point in life, but he tried to get all the main people together. He was not getting on very well with Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And this is the father of Pakistan, and this is very surprising because they had so much in common. Both of them were Gujarati, both of them were from Kathiawar, both of them educated in Britain at the same time. And Jinnah at that time was an assistant to Dadabhai Naoroji. And he was very much British, politically active at that point in time, and he remained like that for 60 years of his life. But Gandhi, 60 years back, no politics, only dress, and see how far they have changed, how Gandhi has changed and how he is. But he had was very like-minded with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who becomes the next first Prime Minister of India. And the people who were sent from Britain to hand over India to the people of India were Lord and Lady Mountbatten, the cousin of the Queen. He was given 10 months to complete the job. He did it in 10 weeks. Very quickly and not very well, because there were so many problems that were not sorted out, especially the fate of the migrant workers. I spoke about the 23 million people all over the world. Their rights were not safeguarded. And the lines were drawn on a map by a person named Viscount Radcliffe. He was someone who had no knowledge of India, who had never visited India earlier. And then he was a lawyer who just drew the lines and partitioned India into India and Pakistan. 14 million people were left in the wrong country. That is Hindus in Pakistan and Muslims in India. There was a lot of violence. 500,000 people were dead in the violence after the partition. And finally, on 15th August 1947, India gets its independence. This is on the eve of Independence Day when Nehru makes his famous speech about freedom at midnight, and India will awaken to freedom and so on. But where is Gandhi? Gandhi is not here. He's not in the capital city. He is at Naukali, which is now in Bangladesh, because that was a worst hit with violence. And he alone, Mountbatten referred to him as a one-man army. With his walking stick, he trekked through 49 villages trying to bring peace. He just lived for a few months after independence. In August, India was independent. In January, he was shot dead by a Hindu radical who believed that he is being too soft towards the Muslims. He said his justification, Natharam Godse, he writes a 16-page justification. He talks about Gandhi being a megalomaniac, how everyone had to obey him, and so on and so forth. He shot him dead. This is Gandhi ready for his cremation. He is wearing just one piece of cloth, and that is something that he had woven himself. He was 78 years old. 1 million people followed the funeral procession that day after he died. And this is what Nehru's radio address announcing Gandhi's death. He says, "The light has gone out of our lives and there is darkness everywhere. The light has gone out, I said, and yet I was wrong. For the light that shone in this country was no ordinary light. 1,000 years later, that light will still be seen in this country, and the world will see it, and it will give solace to innumerable hearts. For that light represented the living truth, the eternal truths, reminding us of the right path, drawing us from error, taking this ancient country to freedom." Now, I wonder whether any of you will recognize any of these names on this list. Can you guess who these people are? These are the Nobel Prize winners from 1930 to 1947. Gandhi was nominated 5 times, but they never gave him the Nobel Prize. And it's only in 2006 that the Nobel Committee said, "The greatest omission in our history is undoubtedly that Mahatma Gandhi never received the Nobel Peace Prize. Gandhi could do without the Nobel Peace Prize. Whether the Nobel Committee can do without Gandhi is the question." But in 1948, after Gandhi's death, they did not give the prize to anybody because they said that there is no suitable living candidate that year. And every year when the Nobel Peace Prize is given, whoever receives it always talks about Gandhi and talks about how he influenced them. So you have all these famous people who always talk about peace and non-violence, and immediately it's Gandhi that comes to mind. After he died, Newsweek had this article which said, "India after Gandhi, what?" So I'm going to ask about what. What happened to the textile industry after Gandhi? Did it survive? Yes. The Indian textile industry today, it's a fantastic $55 billion US industry. There are 35 million people employed, 4% of the GDP, 14% of industrial production, 11% of export earnings. It sounds great, right? But that is not the real picture. Cotton grows, but the farmers are in trouble. Since 1995, 250,000 cotton farmers have committed suicide. That is one farmer every 12 hours. In 1988, there was a seed policy by the World Bank, and there's this company named Monsanto which has a monopoly or patent on seeds. They distribute seeds which are sterile, that you can never use them the next year, you can only use them once. So every year the farmers have to buy fresh seed, expensive seed, and they have to buy pesticides, they have to buy fertilizers. It's a monoculture, there are super pests. So it's just debt, dependency, and distress. When they cannot bear it, so you can see, from 1988, they held on for 8 years, and then the suicide started. And the textiles that are made, how are they made? They are not, there's very little of khadi and home woven anymore. It's all factories that are polluting the environment. These are the rivers in Bangladesh. They say if you look at the rivers in Bangladesh, you know which is the next color that is going to come into fashion. Unsafe working conditions, all of you know about the building collapses of Rana Plaza in Dhaka. 1,134 people dead. The strikes, government worker strikes, what they are asking for is $10 a day, which they are not able to get it. In US, they are talking about the minimum wage of $10 an hour. This is $10 a day, which is not a living wage. It's not just a minimum wage, it's not even a living wage. That's all that they want, and they cannot get. There's a lot of child labor in embroidery, in delicate work. There's a lot of distress. So what can we do? You have to look at Gandhi again. He says, be the change that you wish to see in the world. And how can we change? We have to think about what we do when we buy something. When we buy something cheap, somebody somewhere has paid the price. They have paid it in blood, they have paid it in sweat, they have paid it in tears. We have just paid a little bit of cash, that's all. So you have to be careful about what we buy. And Gandhi says, a small body of determined spirits, fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission, can alter the course of history. And that's what we need to do. But it's very difficult, not easy. Not everyone can be Gandhi. No wonder that Albert Einstein said, generations to come, it may well be, will scarce believe that such a man as this one, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth. Thank you.